Hello, friends. I hope you guys have had a I'll wait for a second. I hope you guys have had a wonderful day, and you guys are ready to learn about lipids. So lipids are really described as things that are hydrophobic, and so to be hydrophobic, you really have to lack mostly oxygens and nitrogens and things like that. So it's mostly made of carbons and hydrogens, and you're going to see that a lot of carbons and hydrogens. Now, that being said, there will be a few oxygens around, and we'll talk about what that means when we actually see them and when we look at the actual molecules themselves, I promise. So, like it says here, unifying thing, little or no affinity for water. Most of the time, they are hydrophobic completely. They want nothing to do with water. We use them mostly in organic molecules inside of your body and most animals and things like that as fats, phospholipids, and steroids. Realistically, the most important one is actually the second one, phospholipids, because without phospholipids, our cell membranes don't work. The other two are used to do different jobs in different animals. So we'll kind of take a look. So fats are constructed from two types of molecules, glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol is a 3-carbon alcohol. We'll take a look at what that means because I know those words probably mean nothing to you, with a hydroxyl group, which you learned about before, attached to each carbon. So taking a look real quick at glycerol right here. And then a fatty acid is a carboxyl group attached to long carbon skeletons of just carbon and hydrogens. So there's the carboxyl group, and then the long carbon and hydrogen chains. So taking a look here, there's something that's interesting. So they connect. It's an ester linkage. You really don't need to know that as much as like the glycidic linkage to the last one. But you'll notice that there are oxygens. Like Mr. Rogers said that there's mostly just carbon hydrogens. But this right here, these are slightly polar, these right here. So depending on how many oxygens are here, and maybe we can throw some other oxygen in other places, you might get a little bit of polarness in some regions. And we'll kind of talk about why that might be important elsewhere. So another thing I want to throw in just for fun facts, glycerol is a component of nitroglycerol, which is an explosive, which is TNT. There's been movies and stuff. One of the most famous ones is Fight Club. And in Fight Club, they take soap and they turn it into actual explosive. They actually take human fat and they turn it into soap, which is a great time we can do that. And they turn the glycerol into actual explosives and they blow up a building. Spoiler alert. So here, fat separated from water. I said this before in another one. Not because fats hate water, but because water hates them. So water is technically the bully. I don't want anybody to ever think that it's fat's fault. And then in a fat, the 3 fatty acids join together by those ester linkages. We call them triglycerols, acylglycerols, but or triglycerides. Triglycerides is probably the more common term. So there's 2 kinds of fatty acids that we're going to deal with as fats. There are saturated fatty acids and there's unsaturated. And there's some really easy ways of remembering this. First, saturated means that there's the maximum amount of hydrogens possible, and unsaturated, that means that there's double bonds, so there's not as many hydrogens as there could be. The other way of remembering it is saturated fatty acids are from animals. Unsaturated is from plants. And if you think about animals, our fat inside of us is solid. Unsaturated fats are liquid and oils. So if you take a look at it, next slide here, we have a saturated fat. There's no double bonds in this chain here. This is a saturated fat because there's a maximum amount of hydrogens. This is a solid, kind of like butter up here. Unsaturated fat, there's a double bond. And even just this one double bond, oleic acid, is found a lot in olive oil. It becomes a liquid. So this is unsaturated. Now, unsaturated stays liquid. Saturated are fats at room and body temperature. So fats from saturated acids are called saturated fats, blah, 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 blah. Most animal fats are saturated. The only ones that really aren't are fish. So fish are unsaturated as well. That has a lot to do with their environment. And then unsaturated fats are oils, mostly liquid when we're dealing with them. And if you think about it, think of all the oils you use for cooking. They're all going to have plant names in front of them except fish oil. Okay, so you got things like vegetable oil, olive oil, coconut oil, all these different ones. We keep going, palm oil, all these different guys. Now, a diet rich, a little healthier, a diet rich in saturated fats, those are solids at room temperature and partially solid in your body temperature. They get stuck, having too much of them, they get stuck in your blood vessels and they form plaque deposits. So it's like putting glue down a sink, and sooner or later that glue is going to catch other things and it's going to cause a clog in the actual plumbing. Same thing when your heart and your body, the glue is going to stick to the sides of your arteries and veins and grab other things, and sooner or later it's going to stop the blood from flowing. The other really famous thing with this is the hydrogenation of fats. This is something that started in the 1950s. We talked about high fructose corn syrup and how they've used that because you're addicted to it. You do also have a prevalence and want to have animal fat because, you know, we like protein. I mean, we're part carnivores, we're omnivores. We really like eating meat. And so we have a craving for saturated fats. And so you can actually turn unsaturated fats and saturated fats because plants are easier to grow than it is a cow. Plants are a lot cheaper. I can grow a whole field of corn and turn it into saturated fats now that humans actually really crave. And so what they do is hydrogenation is basically pumping a bunch of hydrogens into a fat solution, and it turns the bond that what's happening here, because this bond right here is going this direction and this direction, that makes it a cis bond. It turns it into a trans bond, a trans double bond, and these are called trans fats. Trans fats are super bad for you. Your body doesn't know what to do with them. They are not natural to your body, and they don't, lack of a better term, they don't pack well. It's like if you pack for a trip, if you pack well, you can get a lot more shirts and pants in there. If you don't pack well and you just throw things in there, you don't get nearly as much. So trans fat, for the same amount of fat, takes up a lot more space. So someone could be full of trans fats instead of cis fats and be same weight as somebody but look a lot bigger because their fats are trans based. Okay? Trans fats are also super linked to cardiovascular disease because they don't pack well. I just talked about saturated fats being sticky in your arteries and veins. Now you have something sticky in your arteries and veins that is expanded out and doesn't have a streamlined basically formation. It's sticking out and grabbing more things. So trans fats are horrible for you. We are starting to realize that as scientists the last 40 years. It takes time for the general public to catch up, just like everything else in this world. Scientists will say something is bad, people get mad about it because it changes their life, and slowly they're like, oh yeah, that is really bad. And so trans fats are getting banned in most foods across the nation. Europe's had them banned for about 10 to 15 years. You're starting to see like a bunch of different states put in laws like California, and that's kind of changing what kind of food we can eat. The most famous one, not famous one that impacted me the most is Oreos changed from trans fat a couple years ago. And they're still good, but they don't hit the same way as they used to. Trans fat Oreos, so good. So our major function of these fats in the human body is energy storage. So realistically, what a fat is, going back here, is all these carbon and hydrogens. Your body makes fats if it doesn't actually eat them. It makes them by pre-packing glucoses together and taking off the oxygens. So this is just stored energy waiting to be turned back into useful energy in our bodies. So we use them as energy storage, as something called adipose tissues. Adipose tissues in our body and a bunch of different animals' bodies also used for other things, like almost all of our organs are surrounded by adipose tissue for cushion. We don't want our organs getting hurt. We're pretty mobile as an organism. We jump around, move around, fall, things like that. So we want cushion around those organs. And we also use it to insulate our body. We're actually the only primate with fat all the way around our body. You have a layer of fat underneath your skin all the way around, which makes us unique. There's a lot of speculation why we're like that, but it's really just us and then the marine mammals that have that layer of fat like that. So most of the speculation comes around the fact that humans must have evolved near water or had a past in water more so than other primates. So the other way we could use fat, and it's used across all cells and all living organisms, is phospholipids. This is the way that we make cell membranes. And a phospholipid, if you remember from 10th grade, you probably don't remember these guys so much, but what you remember is this guy, these little jellyfish. And these jellyfish have a hydrophilic head or a polar head, and they have these fat tails, these hydrophobic tails. And what they actually look like chemically is this. Here we have the fatty acid tails. We have the glycerols. Well, you'll notice here, it's not a triglycerol. There's not 3 tails. There's only 2. You also notice that this guy right here is bent. Now, because of the bentness, it doesn't make him a liquid, but it definitely makes him more fluid. It makes him more able to move, which is important when we go into cell membranes. So this glycerol is connected to a phosphate instead of another guy here. And then we have a choline up top, which is an organic molecule that has a couple carbons but has a nitrogen positive. And so it is and with the phosphate, this is very polar up top here. Okay, so we have a hydrophilic head, hydrophobic tail. The only reason that this guy will want to connect with these guys is because this glycerol is slightly polar. And so he can connect with these guys and deal with these guys while these guys can't down here. So that's what I was talking about. It's kind of important that these glycerols are slightly polar. Here's a closer look at them here. So when phospholipids are added to water, like I just throw them into water, just toss them in, kind of like just throwing a baby in a pool. They do that automatically. They actually create a cell membrane without any rules or anything like that. They create an enclosed space, which is kind of crazy to think about. So at one point, living things were just an enclosed space with some basic replicating tools for some chemicals at some point. And this is important that it can just be thrown in there. And so it's really weird to think about what was the first living organism. Like why is life life? Why are we here? Why is this existent? And we have the ability to mimic a cell membrane really easy by just throwing these in there. We can create a cell membrane automatically. So that's kind of important. There's a bilayer arrangement in this in cell membranes. So it's not just one layer of jellyfish. You got the other layer of jellyfish. And obviously they're flipped because these non-polar tails here want to interact with other non-polar tails. And these polar heads, guess what they want to interact with? They want to interact with the water because water's polar. So these polar heads interact with water. These non-polar tails are like, nah, we'll just stick together. Now, the other important fat, the other way we use it is steroids. We'll get to steroid use in humans in a second, but cholesterol is a big part of this. Cholesterol is got a bad rap in humans right now because people have too high of cholesterol. Cholesterol is basically a glue. It helps glue cell membranes. So even though, like I said, these guys are very fluid, there's different spots where there will be cholesterol within this cell membrane that kind of glue them and kind of say, you guys can be fluid, but we kind of have to stay here. It's almost, I wouldn't say like a leash, but it's definitely a limiting factor of where these guys move. So cholesterol is super important. The problem is when you have too much cholesterol. And that's because you have extra glue in your body is the way to think about it. And then it sticks to things and sticks in your arteries and veins, and then you have the trans fats and saturated fats. You can see where this is going. So steroids and cholesterol always, 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 always look like this. They always have the same setup. They always have 4 rings, ring, 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 ring. Now this ring, you can make an argument, doesn't really look like a ring. I think it looks like a a house, I guess, but it always has 4 rings, and it has different functional groups coming off depending on what it's doing. One of the previous guys I showed you guys, the precursor to estrogen, estradiol, and testosterone, and how similar they were. The only differences were what they had as functional groups. So whenever you see a structure with 4 rings, just yell out steroids. That's the answer. It's a steroid. Okay? So lipids, they form steroids, they form phospholipids, they form fats. There is cholesterol is important for steroids. Phospholipids are important for cell membranes. And then the fats, unsaturated fat is oil. It's better for you. Saturated fat is important for you. You still need saturated fat, but too much of it's a bad thing. Okay? And we've learned as humans how to turn unsaturated fat to mimic saturated fat, and they create something called trans fats. All these fats are used for the same things, basically. It's used for either energy storage, insulation, or cushion. So I hope you guys have learned something. Hope this makes sense. Hope you're getting somewhere with fats. If you need any help, let me know. Have a wonderful day.